Well, thank you very much for having me out here. Again, my name is Kane, and I'm going to be presenting hopefully a little bit about PACE. I tend to use a fair amount of jargon, so please stop me in my tracks if I get a little bit confusing. So, first of all, what is PACE and what does PACE stand for? So PACE is Property Assessed Clean Energy. Right now, it's a public-private partnership, which has been unrolled about maybe 34 states in the U.S., and about 16 markets are pretty active. City of Chicago actually rolled out their program finally after a number of years on the way. Folks like Dave's group and my folks have done a lot of work to kind of lay the groundwork. What it really is, and Dave hinted at it, is there's this nexus in real estate between energy savings and obviously, doing well and doing right by the environment. And we are that portion of the capital stack that hopefully comes in to make the projects happen. So fundamentally, right now, you can best look at us as a cross between both a mortgage and vendor finance. So PACE financing is 100% of project financing for sustainability, efficiency, and resilience upgrades. Those are very broadly written. Those mean anything from roofs, envelopes, shells of buildings. You could have things like anything from your LED lights to your green roofs, and then we can do much more than that. So it's hard costs, soft cost, and the associated cost, and I can kind of get into specifics with that. Like a mortgage, we run on a fixed term rate. So in commercial mortgage world, you're going to see a lot of adjustable, and then especially in the construction world and the developers, who the best use case probably is for this product, we find that there's a lot of variable rates. So fundamentally, we're fixed. We're anywhere between 5 and 30 years. In San Francisco, we can do a seismic retrofit to the base and the foundation of a building, which will qualify for 30 years. Certain chillers last 28 years, so we can go up to 28 years, and so we can go up to 30. Most of what we're doing, and in the different product category, we can probably finance for about 25 years. Everything is fully transferable, so if you took the other kind of alternative financing options in commercial real estate, a lot of times there's a kind of a lengthy assumption process. And what that means is basically a giveaway to lawyers to kind of go back and forth about what the penalty is for you getting done with your loan soon. In this, just like your home, when you want to sell your house, it's not like the county gives you a bill for the present value of your taxes in the next 30 years in the future. They just say, pay this year's tax, and the next man or woman has to then assign it. It's just a 2-page form. We allow prepayment options, which is pretty standard amongst most financing options out there, and we cater typically to like owner-operators who might own the building as for a number of years through like a family business, and they have no intention of ever taking off the loan. And then we can also accommodate kind of the fix and flippers, so big developers who are building and might only own the building for 3 years and want to get out, or maybe some folks have a 5 or 7 year time horizon. If you think about what PACE is, and I can kind of get to the nuts and bolts now, imagine it as a ground lease, but with much, much better remedies to the borrower. So we have a number of things on our side. So what PACE financing actually does is it takes a mortgage, okay, and it stuffs it into the form of an assessment. It's a voluntary assessment. And what that does is it allows you, okay, as a building owner, to put on a normal senior mortgage, just like you would on your residential house. And I just use the house because we all kind of know about that. It allows you to get a normal senior mortgage, and then it allows you to get an increment on top of that. So sometimes you do that for a number of reasons. Let's say you need a certain equity contribution. If you put in less money into a building, it's more affordable. Raising equity is very expensive and time consuming, and it's almost always the most expensive part of the capital stack. So you might need to pay me or a senior loan 4, 5, 6%. You're going to need to pay your equities, who you literally pass the hat around, maybe 10, 12%. So we're a cheaper alternative than equity. Why it's important is because it's super low cost financing. So construction and heavy value add rehab are very difficult, and so banks look upon those as very risky undertakings. Things go wrong, you open up walls, all of a sudden you got pipes, you got issues, you run your trusted engineer through, and all of a sudden you realize that you got a chiller plant that's down, the roof is shot, and the envelope of the building is leaking like a sieve. Those are all bad things, and you just don't know until you get in. So banks penalize you consistently for that. PACE takes a more agnostic view, and I can get into a little bit of the details a little bit later, but right now, in order to bridge the gap, okay, between where normal lenders will lend you right now, so maybe 60% of cost, 70% of cost, 80% of cost if you got the right product type, we allow you to actually get a little bit more. So again, it's the lower the equity requirement, the better the owner or operator will do in terms of getting the money back to the investors. Also, mezzanine debt is very expensive. So interest rates are much higher. There's all kinds of restrictions. Us as PACE financing, we don't have those same restrictions. And the reason why we feel so comfortable and we can go long and give you great rates is because eventually we become a tax lien. And broadly speaking, people in the US pay their taxes. And so we feel very comfortable that we're going to be paid back as capital providers at some point, so we can really go long on your projects. Interesting thing about, because we look, feel, and smell like a tax, is that there are a lot of tenants out there who have different leases, okay? In certain lease structures, like a triple net, allows you as the building owner to pass all of the insurance, all of the energy costs, all of everything that deals with the space directly to the tenant. So when you have, say, a Verizon, or when you have, that really great law firm at the Class A office building, in their leases, they say in general terms that you can pass through taxes. Because we are a tax, we can pass it all through. As a building owner, that's interesting because all of a sudden it becomes off-book financing. And because it's a tax lien, it has some interesting ramifications there. Interestingly enough, one of the biggest users right now are malls. So right now, Washington Prime and the Simon Group, they, whenever they have a roof that goes out, whenever they have a chiller that goes out, what they do is they literally will take our PACE financing quote, and then they hand it down to their leasing division, and then they see whose lease of all their tenants there can take a tax increase. And they say, okay, well, right now, Publix won't allow it, okay, but, maybe Forever 21 will take a 2% tax increase this year. Maybe all these things. And what they do is if they can get a substantial amount of the payment passed through directly per their lease, then effectively it becomes free money for them. So if your tenants are paying for your mortgage, it doesn't matter what it costs because it's going straight down to them. So that's why in certain cases with certain tenants, it can be effectively free financing. At some point in time, when you're doing these heavy value add rehabs, when you're putting in the really great systems, your lenders get scary, or they get scared, and then they're going to want to see different CapEx reserves that you hold back. That is fundamentally unproductive money. Right now, because you're getting the money from another source, and because you're getting all these savings and whatnot, we're able to actually have those released. And it's a little bit of a complicated mechanism, but fundamentally there's a lot of money that's on the sidelines that owners and operators of buildings have to deal with when they do these things. This is just one more cost savings in there. So what does it actually look like? So it looks and smells and feels a lot like a mortgage, although it's not technically. Right now rates will move with the market, but our rates for brand new steel up construction is anywhere between 5.5% to 7%. On a brand new multifamily construction on non-recourse, and I can get to that in specifics, that rate might be somewhere anywhere between, for great sponsors, anywhere between 7% all the way up to 12%, with probably the average being in maybe 8.5. And these are for very, very good high quality sponsors building great stuff in great markets. So fundamentally we can be cheaper on the interest rate. Our amortization rates are, again, anywhere between, our terms are anywhere between 20 and 30 years generally, especially for new construction. We're going to be around 25 or 30 years. And we have incredibly lax underwriting in terms of the statutory stuff. So our debt service coverage ratio, okay, just says a 1.0 debt service coverage ratio is just a fancy way of saying you need to be able to prove that when you stabilize your building, when you finish it in 3 years and 5 years or whatnot, all right, that you can pay back your loans. So no other bank's going to allow that. And again, it's because we're a tax position that all of a sudden we feel very, very comfortable and we can really go that distance. One of the interesting things is that we are funding not on loan to cost, okay, but on loan to value. So you'd never build a building for where the cost equals the market value. So when you build that new multifamily building, you're going to build it for an $80 million cost, okay, but it's going to be worth $100 when you're done if you do it right. So if the market stays with us. Fundamentally, why we're doing that is because we want to make sure that you get all the savings, and we don't want people downsizing on the really good, sustainable products that could really help frankly, their savings. And again, this is a public-private partnership. The goal is to enhance sustainability in the built environment. So literally city governments, county governments, and the state governments all want this program because fundamentally, cleaner buildings generally are better for the environment, they're better for water, they're better for everything, they're better for the grid, and people, by and large, like living in them. So as part of this, the whole goal is to make this as compelling a financing so that you can really do the good projects that you need to do. There's no balloon payments, so you get to the end of a CMBS loan, okay, which is a popular type of loan, and at the end of 10 years, come hell or high water, you got to pay that back. The market's up. That's great, you can refinance, that's perfect. The market's down, that's a bad deal. That's all of a sudden 08, 09 again, you gotta go into workout. I wasn't around, but that's the savings and loan crisis all over again. That's very bad thing. So again, we're stretching out the term to equal 25 or 30 years, same as our amortization. So in the same way that you pay your house, you don't need to pay it back in 10 years, but if you got a Freddie or Fannie loan, you can go all the way 30 years. So right there, what can we actually cover? And this is the big question. So energy efficiency in the laws was written very, very broadly. We had actually it was a 25-story building down in Miami, and they had air handlers that they needed to put up, and they ran a crane over the landscaping. We paid for the new landscaping, and we paid to resod everything and do all that. So again, if you need an air handler and you need a helicopter to come over from California, we'll pay for the whole ferry trip. If there is a valid reason why you need something, some specialty, some specialist, the law is very broad, and it says that we can cover those costs. So those typically are covered almost entirely out of pocket, and those are the things that really add up on the projects. One of the interesting things too is that we can actually pay for the different professionals. So for all the advisors for for all the energy studies, okay, for architecture, for all the engineering drawings, we can cover all those. One of the biggest issues that we find with developers is they say, well, I want to build this building, the market will support it and this and that, but it's getting together that initial $1 million of all that risk money, to do this stuff, to get the entitlement, to get the architects working and all that. There's some phasing issues that we need to work about. We can't just pay you day one, okay? We can't just fund into a hole, or to a brown field, but with some rules, we can pay all those costs. And then I can kind of get into, as service providers, why it's a really interesting tactic. So. It, broadly speaking, looks and feels just like a mortgage. And here's the big caveat, okay? We work on effectively 2 rules for how much we can finance and then how we actually disperse the money. So the first rule is we look at is we work with the property owner and we say, okay, how much will your building be worth as stabilized when it's all built? And so that $80 million cost building that he or she thinks is going to be worth $100 million, all of a sudden, so we say, okay, $100 million. We can take 25% of that in the city of Chicago. Different states have a little bit different rules in different counties, but broadly speaking, it's about 20 to 25% of that as stabilized market value. So in a $100 million market value, I can fund $25 million as a cap. And then what we do is we go over to your project budget, and we literally click down the list and we check off. We say, okay, well, you need this contractor, you need this system, you need this and that. We will go down. And so up to that cap, we can fund anything. One of the interesting things about the way how the math works is that typically, although we can only cover 25% of the market value, we might be able to cover 40% of the cost, okay, for an entire construction project. Maybe even 50 in some more specialized stuff. So it's really, this is not an insignificant part of the capital stack. Other competitive sources of financing, like a mezzanine loan, they might only cover, you know, the equivalent of 9, 10, maybe 15% of the whole total cost. So it's a significant amount of money that we go. Also, the reason why it's really cool, why I like it, and all of us as, you know, as hopefully owners of something like it, is because it's non-recourse. And recourse is just a fancy word for what happens in a default. In a recourse loan, okay, you can only, or in a non-recourse loan, you can only go after the bricks and sticks, so to speak. So let's say that I have a building, for whatever reason, 09 happens again, or 08 happens again, I lose it all. They can't go after me personally or as an enterprise. Now they can take back my building, okay, but fundamentally that's just part of the program. In all these other loans, in order to get more leverage, in order to get these features, in order to get the really good rate, you're literally signing, and even very large companies, the principals of these companies are individually signing. There could very well be people, there are several developers of million square footers downtown that literally have their own personal line. It's personal recourse to them. So what happens when a building, you know, doesn't go up in time? What happens when you break a loan covenant? They come after them personally. So this is a very attractive feature. Not only the economics work, but it's a flexibility that says that, okay, in the worst case scenario, okay, I'm covered, or at least my family's covered. I'm not going to lose my house. My business is not going to be bankrupted. And this kind of squish, but really the most expensive part of the capital stack, again, is equity. So equity is pass the hat money. It's, you know, what everybody throws in. It's hard to get. It's just, you know, the money, you know, it's been so good for so long right now, but it's still difficult to raise money. There's only so many family offices out there. There's only so many people that like real estate. There's only so many capital sources out there, so it's very expensive. If we can reduce from 35 down to 20 or whatever the numbers might be, that's real money that's going straight down to the bottom line. Also, the way how most developers and business owners are going to, you know, who are developing or doing these heavy value add rehabs, they might only be throwing in 10% of the equity. So they might be going, you know, passing the hat, so to speak, for 90% outside of that. So when you tell them that they all of a sudden they reduced, you know, it's only 10% of the total capital stack, but they might only need half the amount of equity or whatever that meant. And so all of a sudden it means that they own the really juicy part, which is when you go to sell or refinance the property in 5, 6, 7 years. So you're really helping. You know, whereas a general partner might only get, you know, you might be trying to get 15 or 20% IRR or something like that. All of a sudden you can get 30 or 40, and that's not embellishment. It really it breaks the meter when you can take out that equity. This is really just kind of a raw comparison. All this says is that our money is cheaper than a lot of the other alternatives. So, all right. So what's in it for the property owner? So first of all of us as, you know, as service providers or catering to building owners, the first thing and the easiest to quantify is going to be the energy savings. So, you know, if you got a 100-year-old building with garbage windows, all of a sudden you're moving those to triple pane, you're doing all the stuff that you suggested, you're putting in all those lighting controls, you're putting in all the systems, even new elevators, the on-demand elevators, LED lights, all that stuff is going to have an immediate impact on the bottom line. So if you take $1 of cost reduction, okay, given how you value commercial real estate, that's worth anywhere between $10 to $20 worth of market value. You just added on by literally showing up. So it's every dollar is between $10 and $20 more on the market value of that building. So you have actually created a better building, okay, that's more expensive. So it's worth more to you. You can get more loans on it. You can do all the fun stuff, and hopefully you can get a boat or a nice car or do whatever you guys like to do. So energy savings are going to be the best one. All right, so inexpensive capital. So the world right now, especially with the jitters of the last couple weeks, spreads, which are just a way of basically figuring out how expensive money is, they're starting to wide. So for whatever reason, even in the best market that it's ever been, arguably for commercial real estate, right now there's a little bit of risk in the market. PACE is just one more way to finance in an inexpensive way. Higher leverage, again, for the general partner, they now need to get less debt, you know, our traditional debt, and they now need to raise less expensive equity. Being able to pass through the PACE costs direct to tenants and customers, Simon Malls can go to almost any bank in the world because they've got excellent product, and they can get cheap money, far cheaper than I can ever give it out, frankly, on a dollar-to-dollar basis. But if you pass it through to the tenants, free money beats inexpensive money every day of the week. Again, the off-balance sheet, when a developer goes to that bank and they say, okay, we'll list all your assets and list all your liabilities, all their liability is that year's taxes. It's not the $30 million PACE loan that they have in there. It's just that year's taxes. So it might just be $1 million. So fundamentally, it makes your sponsors look that much stronger when they need to go and do the other building, or when they need to deploy to another thing, when they need to fund another project that we can't cover for whatever reason. So the fun part of who I like talking to is generally who I talk to, it's kind of broken up into, into really two groups. So I go after predominantly developers, and then on the other side I go after the MEP, the mechanical contractors. I want the people who are doing the service. I want the people who actually know what's going on in the building. And the reason why it's interesting is because if you go to the manufacturers of all these chillers and whatnot, there's vendor finance. So if you go to XYZ chiller manufacturer, they'll say, don't worry, we got you covered. We're gonna give you, for this brand new $2 million chiller, we'll give you a 5-year term, okay? It'll be 4% interest, and you gotta pay us, at the end of these 5 years and all that. And don't worry, we'll even fund it 180 days in advance. Well, I can do that same chiller for, for $550 interest over 25 or 28 years. So all of a sudden your payment, goes from, just call it, $250,000 in their option, and all of a sudden I'm at 75 grand for the same thing. And again, for the long repay items like a chiller, where you might need to run it for 10, 15 years in order to get your payback, all of a sudden, their 5-year financing doesn't cut it, okay? You want the long stuff. So it also allows you to avoid last-minute changes in value engineering. So the big question is, would your clients do all the great things that you like to see in your building, okay, that you've told them, that you passionately pleaded with them to do in your marketing report, if the money issue is solved? Most service providers don't ever cover this because, frankly, we've all got our own domain specificity, and we don't want to play in somebody else's arena. If you, on the back of every single proposal, can staple on a financing and say, I have a guaranteed source that will come to the table as soon as, and it's not always going to work, but I can guarantee all the work that I do, okay, can get funded day one. Is that a compelling sales argument? And then it also helps that, when you go and you write that amazing report and you figure out all these energy savings, and then they come back and they say, well, it's just not really for me. I thought that I could get $2 or $3 million out of the investors, and unfortunately, you're going to need to cut it back to 750 grand. So you stop that conversation when you have something stapled to the back. Speeding up the sales cycle. So the whole idea is, I just said that, I apologize. Getting paid faster. So how many clients don't pay you on time, okay, or they pay you slowly, or they only pay you, they need installment plans and this and that? Well, use the PACE capital providers with that. So, we're associated with a $5.5 billion REIT, and we originate probably about $1 billion worth of these loans every year between this and a couple other investments. So our credit, so to speak, is presumably a lot better than, than that condo owner or that certain building owner who might not actually, when it really comes time at the end of the quarter, might be playing around a little bit with the finances. So one of the interesting things about PACE is you can finance multi-year contracts. So when you have that retro commissioning, when you have all the HVAC service, year after year, when you have the elevator service, imagine being able to wrap all those costs in and get paid at once. So now, as service providers, you're saying, well, every year I was going to wait for 50 grand, okay, for the next 10 years, and and maybe my client, is still there. Maybe they cancel. Maybe whatever happens. All of a sudden, what if you get paid all that money up front right then and there? So you can do that on day one. So it moves all of your receivables as service providers up into the forefront. So you can get that money and get it quickly. Finally, it presents a unique selling point. So most people, again, they don't want to venture too far out of what you're really good at. But this is something that's easy to put together. And frankly, we're doing it for a lot of folks where we're going out there, and this becomes a differentiator, frankly, in the market. Even if it never takes hold, it sets you on a different playing field when you're catering more and more to your clients' needs. And so we find that it's a very powerful statement to make. So unfortunately, there's some case studies here that formatting didn't really come out great, but in the grand scheme of things, this one, they upgraded all the LEDs, HVAC and chillers. They did a fair amount of actually envelope work. Obviously, there's a lot of glass there. And this hotel is in LA, and in year one, $335,000. You know, that was the increase. That was the utility cost savings. That literally, you know, multiply that by anywhere between 10 to 20, and that's the amount of market value that they added on day one of doing that stuff. So, you know, again, our payment's going to be lower than the return that you're going to get from the cost savings in most cases. So it just becomes very accretive in a day one thing. So over the hold of the project, which I think right now is, I think this is a 15-year hold, not including the market value increase, we think that we're going to save them about $12.5 million. So these are real compelling numbers. And again, it's very flexible. So. Moving into a little bit more of the down the fairway, this can happen across a bunch of different product types, and we find that actually in the low-income housing space, there's a really interesting use case for this. So these are very skinny deals. Obviously, they're kind of set up for different things other than, you know, making huge cash flow. You can get tax credits and a lot of other stuff, but if you can reduce your your energy spend, all of a sudden that's real money in your pocket. And all of a sudden these deals start to pencil out. And part of the issue right now is workforce housing. And right now, if you can lower these costs, all of a sudden certain deals that wouldn't make sense, make sense. And then finally, this is just one that, and it's interesting, and I can get on to another side. They put on solar, okay, onto this small hotel there, and then actually there was a hotel next door that we did that also has a PACE loan. And one of the interesting things is that, like you can pass the PACE on to your normal tenants in maybe a Class A office building, if you go to a number of hotels, mainly out in California and a few in Florida, you can actually pass this directly through. So next time you stay at a hotel, when you're looking at your folio or your bill at the bottom, look for all the line items. There'll be, you know, the local entertainment tax, there'll be, you know, the local water conservation, there'll be City of Chicago or whatever the local city is. But then you're going to see a little green tax, and it's going to start popping up more and more frequently. So again, it's all about passing that directly through. So not only do they lower their utilities, okay, by 77% in terms of their spend, okay, but the entirety, okay, of the $1 million solar array costs is being directly passed. So it's as if, you know, the owner didn't spend any money out of pocket, and now they've got this great thing, and they're fulfilling all their objectives that they needed to. So I think in general, just as a kind of broad note, these programs are kind of in a patchwork of places across the U.S. These are public-private partnerships, so local states pass enabling legislation that say there shall be PACE, and then after that, it basically goes down to the city or the county level, and then they opt in. So right now, DuPage and Kane County are activated in Illinois. The city of Chicago is fully activated in Illinois, and right now Cook County is close following, and we believe downstate there's a number of counties that are looking at this. Typically, the way that these programs have deployed across the country, because we're not all going to be so lucky to have, you know, all of our projects right in our backyard, is typically a owner or operator or service provider will say, hey, I have a deal down in XYZ location, and then we or another capital provider will go in with actually our government relations team and actually open it up. So there's a very standardized set of documents, and these are very easy deals to kind of go through. Also, they play well with a lot of other things. So imagine being able to not only harvest the energy savings of, you know, a new chiller or new windows or new lights or whatnot, but you also and your owners keep the ComEd rebates. They keep the historical tax credits. They keep everything else. So this plays well with a lot of other different complex types of finance. So we're finding that, you know, not only is it economically a compelling argument, there's a flexibility, but we play well, and so it's just, it's easy to do a transaction. And when it's easy to do a transaction, the execution risk goes down. So that's it.
I have one to start. Yeah. You said at the very beginning, and you said another time, that you have chillers that last 28 years. What's that reference? What are you referencing to determine that? So
the loan amortization and the term of the loan, okay, are gonna be coterminous. So if you have a chiller that they as in the manufacturer can warrant a useful life of 20 years or 25 years or 28 years in this case, we can make a loan for 28 years.
So the manufacturer has to issue a statement, or how's that come out? Or is it a warranty?
So most like most Energy Star appliances will have some economic life or useful life, and so we go off of that. In certain jurisdictions, what we do is we add up the dollar value and then the economic life of all those, and so we say your LED lights last 10, 13 years, and all those. Hopefully you're not getting pneumatic like whatever building systems. You say, okay, well those are 8 or 10 years or maybe 15 years. In some jurisdictions, you're just doing a weighted average. Okay. Here in the city of Chicago, it's the biggest item that you got going in. So if you're doing a $2 million chiller replacement and it's $1 million for the actual chiller, it's $500,000 to get it in, and then it's $500,000 worth of permitting and other stuff, we're just going to take the biggest item. And so in this case, it was, it escapes me what type of a chiller it was, but yeah, that's generally a manufacturer specification. Yeah.
If you're banking on it to last that long, then do you monitor and maintain the operation?
Come again?
Well, if you're banking on a chiller lasting, as an example, a chiller lasting that long, do you monitor the usage then and maintenance? If it don't last that long, we're going to take care of it.
No. We don't monitor. Yeah, we're set and forget. So certain programs.
What if they didn't maintain or maintain it and it died in 10 years?
They're still liable to pay for the mortgage, effectively, or the PACE loan. So they still have to pay us. So it's in their best interest to keep it going. But yeah, if it died and they still had 10 more years, then that's their problem. Yeah. So that's where we get the long-term service contracts in from those folks. So.